Hello. Good afternoon.
Hi, Soraya.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to Nilofer Merchant about her amazing new book, Our Best Work. And we're just going to jump right in and encourage you, if you're here with us, to please share questions in the comment section. Any thoughts you might have, any avenues you want us to pursue, we would love to hear them. Nilofer, it's so nice to be here with you. I've really enjoyed this book, and it's just been a delight to read and to have this conversation. I'll start with a little background. I'm a journalist and a feminist writer. I'm the author of a book called Rage Becomes Her, another one, The Resilience Myth, and the recent one, All We Want Is Everything. There are so many overlaps in our thinking and our work. And you, of course, this is your fourth book. You are an author and also the co-founder of the Intangible Labs, which we'll hear more about. So let's jump in. Why this book and why now?
Oh, it's such a big question, but I'm going to see if I can do it in a minute. There was a moment in the last few years where I realized something really awful was happening around me, and I kept wanting to look at them and be like, "This is the problem. It's them." And then alternatively, I went, "Oh, it's me. Like I must suck, and I need to learn some new skills." And I realized actually it's us. And I thought that's actually what's happening at work too. People are going into work thinking, oh, I just need to learn more and do more and try harder and be resilient and all that stuff.
Mhm.
Or it's them, they suck, capitalism sucks.
Yes.
Like, actually, it's us. And I hope that, at least in the situation I was in when I had that realization, it was really powerful. Because then once it's us, I could figure out what role did I play?
Mm-hmm.
How did I want to navigate the situation forward? Instead of being in a blame and shame kind of
Mm-hmm.
model, it gave me more power.
That's interesting because the thing that really struck me about while I read your book was how much of it comes from that perspective of relationality. You're so good in this book about being clear. You have I should show this table of contents, which I loved. I'm going to do it. Hold on. You have the sort of very clear. You have 24 sort of rules, right? You have invisible norms, and it's practical. It helps people, but the content is really focused on what you just said, which is how we relate, how we think about relating, I think. Peppered throughout the book are these very resonant stories that help to illustrate what you're talking about. Before we get to those, though, can you talk about why these norms? How did you identify these norms? And if you could summarize them so that we can't go through all of them as much as we would like to, but how did you identify them and why these norms? And again, to go back to your other work, a lot of them are intangibles.
Yeah. A colleague of mine, Tim Castell, and I have been working on what could we do to help businesses grow. We'd been doing some research together for years about companies are stuck, and we can figure out like where they are, but we can't figure out how to move them. And so we just kept saying one of these days it'll become clear to us where to help. And one lecture we were doing, we had people identify where they were stuck, like what stops, I think the question was, what stops innovation here?
Mm-hmm.
And the group did that exercise of like, let's brainstorm and then let's list it. And the board was full of things. And all I did was write one word. And I said, it's relational. So it
Mm-hmm.
was, I work really well when people invite me in and use my gifts. I work really well when we know how to have a fair fight. I work really well when we're willing to have difficult conversations at work, right? And so it was a whole series of things. But if you actually bundle it up, it's relational.
Right.
And then we sat there and thought, okay, well, right now we have metrics that really support outcomes, right? Like profitability and efficiency and so on. But we really don't have much visibility as to what these intangible relational elements are. And
Right.
so actually what I did when I first started was I just went through my own journal, because in every one of the moleskins that I've gathered over years, I
Yes.
wish I could show you a picture. In fact, I probably can just like do a little, like, since we're live, but like,
Yes. There they are. Oh, you're so much more organized than I am.
yeah. And which are all stuffed with ideas and
Yeah.
color coded and blah, 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 with little tabs singing off it. And I was like, oh, I've been writing about metrics every third page. And in
Mm-hmm.
each of those pages, I've been saying, the thing we could actually measure is X.
Mm-hmm.
And again, my colleague Tim and I just sat there and said, okay, if we were going to just figure it out, like what would we measure? We came up with a list and we just kept sitting with the list. And
Mhm.
it's funny because we didn't do traditional research. And we were sharing this list with Amy Edmondson, who wrote Psychological Safety,
Mm.
and feeling a little, it was new to us. And we were like, like kids in front of the teacher kind of a little bit, right? Because Amy's so unbelievably talented. And she was sitting there staring at the slide that I had of these 24 elements and just staring and staring. And you know how when you're presenting, there's this thing that happens where you totally know where everyone's eyes are.
Mhm.
I was watching Amy out of the corner of my eye, noticing she wasn't focused on anything I was saying. She was just intently,
Looking at it. Right.
yeah, uh-oh, kind of like that feeling of like, oh. She came up to me at the end of the night and she said, I wanted you to know that I was really staring at it. And I'm like, yeah, I noticed. And she said, I think you've solved the fundamental elements which you're solving for, which is for innovation and what limits work, is also the same emergent qualities we'd solve for if we were solving for psychological safety.
Ah, that's amazing. Because actually, my next
Right?
question is really about moving from the micro to the macro, right? And throughout the book, and I think certainly throughout our conversations in the past, we've talked about those butterfly effects, and we've talked about the repetition and the self-similarity that comes from the way even intimate interactions and relationships work, and the things we think of as not intimate, right? Professional or political, but are all relational.
They're all-
Um, they're all relational. And so can you talk about, I don't want to say pick your favorite one, but give us a good example of that idea that maybe the way we identify or negotiate problems, and I don't want us to talk about the speech dominance thing yet, because we're going to get to that, but the way we negotiate problems has similar mechanisms regardless of context, and that can help us.
Mm. Okay, so let's just choose a really easy one.
Mm.
Performance reviews, really commonly done within organizations. Everyone hates them categorically. The person getting it, the person giving it, all the
Mhm.
HR to manage the process, no one likes them. And yet we do that.
Right.
And the thinking is, well, we need to give people feedback and we need to, show them where they are vis-a-vis other people so that, that useful process helps people know whether or not to get in line and how to get in line with us. And I had this epiphany not that long ago, like maybe like 10 years ago now, where I said, I love it when people judge me. I love it when people aren't just pushovers and they don't just encourage me. I'm in this big room of people. I love it when people, push back. And I said, I think it makes me do better work. And the whole room laughed.
Mm.
Uh-oh, am I the only one here that thinks that's a good idea? And the room was laughing because I made this assumption that I needed to be pushed to become who I wanted to be, that I needed an external force to drive me forward. And what I actually just needed was to actually follow my own gifts and talents and capabilities and grow them.
Mm.
And I haven't met a person alive yet who doesn't want that. And so here's the thing that's happening in orgs. We basically say we have to judge one another,
Yes.
retroactively, by the way, and
Mhm.
like a year later, kind of thing, tell you what you did or did not do
The
well,
review.
the review. And we'll often say there's the right way to do things.
Mhm.
Right? There's just like, oh, there's one way to do things. And I'm like, I think that's called supremacy if you believe there's one way
Yeah.
to do things. And judgment, I've never met a person, whether it's a kid or an adult, who actually likes to be judged, like who actually thrives in that situation. Actually, what we all do better with is encouragement.
Mhm.
And so here's a norm that almost all of us accept. Even if we hated reviews when we got them, when we become a manager, we're like, but we have to rate people.
We have to do them.
We
Yes.
have to do them. And this is where I'm basically arguing that we're participating in our own oppression,
Right.
right?
Well, they
Because
are norms. That's why that's how it happens, you
right, and
know?
the thing is, if we can't see it, we can't even go, gosh, is that
Mm.
serving us?
Mm.
And I
That's right.
went and found the first metrics that were created. So one of the fun things I did for each of the chapters is I just drew on my sort of love of history reading
Mhm.
and realized that. So I went back to one of my books and saw that the first real set of metrics were around like the Egyptian pyramids when they had to break up the
Oh,
big.
you went far back.
And in order to do that, like somebody has to sit there and go, okay, well then we need 12 people to do this and 13 people to do this and so on and
Mhm.
so on, right? And people were measured by how effective they were. And I noticed that all the people got metrics, but the guy paying for the pyramid did not.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, well, then these really are not serving for the larger goal. They're keeping us in a particular kind of confined space, saying, here's who
Mm.
we are. And if
Yes.
we could actually go, you know what are the 100 other ways we could do this?
Mm.
And then as we're working together, we could go, Soraya, that's not really working for you.
Mm.
And do you want some ideas for how to do it differently? And could we brainstorm that?
Yes. It's interesting too, because if you shift, we're such an individualistic culture,
Hmm.
both in terms of goals, performance, or resilience, for example, in organizations as much as in our personal lives. And the other through line in your book that I think was really consistent and to me so valuable is that by shifting to relationality, you then freed, I think, us as readers, and maybe yourself, I don't know, but to really think about distributed cognition, distributed care, distributed results, distributed leadership.
Yeah.
And I think that's really notable because it comes through in many of your chapters. But I want to ask you particularly to start off, though, with this idea of care
Hmm.
and need, which we all need and have, right? Now, we all have needs. We feel them acutely. We understand the need for care. It's sometimes very difficult to practice a caring ethos in our society.
Hmm.
Everything's geared against it, the economy, the politics, it has to be a conscious act to give mutual and distributed support and care. But can you talk about that, the role of that idea in your thinking here?
Yeah. So quite often we think about care as coming from a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And the epitome of that in business is called a servant leader.
Right.
And the history of that sort of language was in the 70s. A guy retired from AT&T
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to basically kind of reflect back on his career and what he did well. So he was kind of giving himself an attaboy and then saying, oh, what I really did well and what everyone should do is be a servant leader.
Right.
And I think in so many ways, there's something beautiful in that care matters, right? So that message, important. But what's interesting as I watched it, and there was a story in the book, and I'm trying to think what the person's name is called that is cloaked because I'm actually thinking of the real person, but she had basically followed a boss to another company. And one of the reasons when she was explaining to me why she was going to follow this boss is she said,
Mm-hmm.
he's such a great servant leader. He really cares about
Yes.
me. And what I was noticing is that she was now in a dyad with this guy where he basically got credit for all of her work and so on. And she was unbelievably talented. And she felt just grateful to have his umbrella care.
Mm-hmm.
And and as they got into a particular dynamic where the CMO wanted something to happen, she basically got caught in the middle between her boss, who's the head of product, and the CMO. And
Mm-hmm.
the data says, by the way, that if you do a sucky job, it doesn't matter whether or not you get to keep your job or not. What matters in whether or not you get to keep your job is whether or not your boss likes you.
Isn't that terrible, though?
God, it's like one of those things that you're like, oh, but also so true. So she basically did the smartest thing she could do, which is she stayed in allegiance with her boss.
Mm-hmm.
When it kind of came to push to shove, like the business needs were not getting met, she's the one who's voted off the island. And the reason is because she can be blamed for not focusing on the business.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, no one was focused on the business. As long as we're in a relationship where we have to rely on our boss to care for us, instead of, by the way, care being a set of policies the company can do,
Mm-hmm.
then I actually have to keep kissing your ass in
Right.
order to keep my job.
Right.
And if care is actually a set of policies that says we are going to make sure our face is towards the sun of the work, then we would actually reward the right behavior.
It's interesting too, because when I heard you say that, all I could think of is cults of personality and narcissism, right?
Yeah.
The way our hierarchies work, they really lend themselves, unfortunately, we're paying consequences for both of those things, right? And if you have that relationship you just described, where you're not thinking about care, you're not thinking about outcomes that are not tied to the person you're beholden to, you're just going to end up with more of the same, you
Right. And,
know?
and, it, and it comes with strings, right? So if I have to suck up to a servant leader, then I'm stuck in a particular dyad. But if it's part of care is in the policy,
Mm-hmm.
then a whole bunch of us can take roles leading.
Right. And that's the idea of distributed care and leadership, I think.
Right. So we can step in and step out as we need to step up, right? This role needs
Yes.
Soraya's gifts. This role needs Nilofer's gifts. This role needs, and all of a sudden now you're like, oh, in this phase of the project,
Mm-hmm.
what is the thing we need? What's the situation in the
Yeah.
project?
Whose strengths will benefit us?
And then all of a sudden you can go, oh, I'm game, right? Because
Right.
care is in the structure, and that sets up the scaffolding for all of us to be successful, not just the ones who can cooperate with their boss.
That's so interesting too. I'm coming from the perspective of social justice organizing,
Mm,
and it's very hard, I think, for organizations and people who embrace values that are not hierarchical
mm,
in their execution, right? Our corporate life is militaristic. That's how corporate structures originated, right? Very top down. You've got officers, you have all the different types of people in that hierarchy. But to provide alternatives to that is sometimes extremely difficult logistically, culturally. And I think that what you're saying provides a pathway for that, because you can really you can center care and you can value people for their strengths as complementary instead of competitive.
right. Which is a beautiful book that Ruchika Tvilyashin just
Yes, she
published
did.
called Uncompete. So we're slightly off topic, but I want to give a plug for that book
Yes,
because it's such a core idea of we don't need to be in competition.
right.
And in fact, the best economic models are collaborative models.
Hmm.
And in fact, it was Eleanor Ostrom, the Nobel
Yes.
Prize economist, who actually is someone I'm referencing and leveraging
Hmm.
in this chapter on servant leadership, and saying, before she came along, the economic thought of the day was that if you didn't have government intervention, then basically there would be chaos. Everyone would just take like hungry,
Hmm.
like take all the marbles off the table as fast as they could, and the one
Yes.
who did it fastest won. And it was a game of hungry hippo. And she came along and said, actually, given the opportunity to do shared resource allocation, communities can actually set up their own ways of care and can actually keep each other accountable in that model. And so,
Hmm.
of course, she's writing about grazing land, and
Yes.
I'm like saying, actually, it's a meeting.
Yes.
So it come into the meeting and say, what would be our norms? And our norms could be, we don't like people who monologue here, because
Hmm.
monologuing takes up way too much time. It probably means you're not listening very well, etc. Or it could be that we don't start a meeting until we have a minute of connection with everyone in the room. So we just hear, oh, did you get a bad night's sleep?
Yeah.
Did your cat just die? Is it snowing?
Yeah, the
Right.
check-in. The
Yeah,
check-in.
check in, right? So that we can actually remember there are real people that we're talking with,
Hmm.
even if it looks like a little box, of someone on screen. It's a real person on the other side. And so we just get a chance to connect before we create. And so
Right.
those norms can actually help us do that sort of distributed, now we're in it together ethos.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to actually go back to this servant leadership, because one of the things you do in this chapter, like other chapters, is overturn people's assumptions of what might be normal or right or natural or good. You do it very effectively.
Thank you.
And I want to read this
Please.
because I think it's useful. Um, Step into any bookstore, scroll the leadership section online, and one message dominates. Caring for people is the gold standard of leadership. And who could argue? Caring outshines autocratic leadership, where power flows top down and leaders are obeyed, not questioned. It's certainly better than transactional leadership, where carrots or sticks replace real connection. And it's better than bureaucratic leadership, where good ideas get buried by rigid chains of command. Even transformative and charismatic leadership take a backseat to caring leadership, not because we don't want inspiration, but because what we truly crave is to be cared for. And then you say a little more and you say the archetype of caring leadership, the servant leader.
Mm.
And then you end up with, and so the theory goes. And in this chapter, in addition to this idea that employees are really beholden to the affections of the person they work for, is also, I think the flip side of that is, even if you say you have a caring corporate culture or a caring leader, it's still true that the there's a difference in the importance of the person doing the caring. And that falls in line with the hierarchy.
That's right. And of
That's
course,
in place.
make a distinction, right? Like structure is one thing. Like if we're using hierarchy to structure and say, okay, this has to happen first and this has to happen second.
Yes,
I think you and I are having a conversation about ranked human value,
that's right.
right? And so
And
much,
beyond status, like it goes
right,
beyond status.
right. And in fact, just yesterday I was meeting with someone and he's got a 9-person firm and he was thinking about how to design the firm so it actually was doing the best work. And so he said, I came up with this idea that we would all be paid the same.
Yes.
And he goes, because then we're all on the same boat. We have the same goals, etc. And he said, even $1 difference would change that model. And I was just like, oh, gold stars, right? It's like, how do we actually figure out creative new ways of being?
Yes. And relating.
And relating.
And relating. Yes.
Exactly.
You have in an early chapter a hierarchy of human value, which it's funny that you said that because it's one of the things that I marked here. And that is linked to ultimately our notions of self-sacrifice, even down to who has the right to sleep in the society, right? And
that
I remember
chapter is called "You Can't Sleep When You're Dead." I think.
Yes, you can't sleep when you're dead. And both you and I have written about this. In my book about resilience, it was important because I was trying to show the relationship between time allocation, bodily needs, and power in work, which is, your chapters all have great titles, but this chapter, You Can't Sleep When You're Dead, I had marked up several different ways. Can you talk about this chapter? I'm not even going to pick something out of it because I'm looking at all kinds of things.
Oh gosh. I will say that my sister, when she read this chapter, was super bummed out. And because what it's talking about is that entire economic models are set up based on sacrifice. And,
Absolutely.
right.
The
And
GDP is set up based on sacrifice. Yes.
And so I was basically using as an illustration, it was an article I had read right after the election in 2016. And I want to say it was a New York Times piece. I haven't been able to find it ever since I read it, but it was like a pretty good sized profile of 2 couples. And basically the way I remember the story, so, who knows, my imagination being what it is. The couples the men used to be the primary wage earners. One was a steel worker, one did something else, construction, I want to say, and they both lost their jobs. Their wives wanting to take care of the family ended up getting jobs at Walmart. The men were incredibly upset at the women because they were no longer at the kitchen table and no longer nurturing them and no longer doing the small little loving acts that really made them feel special. And then the women were mad at the men for not appreciating how hard they were working to kind of just pull it together, right? Because in Walmart's model, if you don't show up to work, you don't get paid. I think it's something like 38% of the people who work for Walmart are paid substandard wages. Like you cannot actually, even if you work.
Well, it's subsidized
Work, exactly, by the government. And so I was like, so I'm basically taking this whole story apart. Like the women are mad at the men and the men are mad at the women. And I'm reading the article and I'm like, is no one mad at Walmart? Right? Because the entire economic structure is Walmart basically wants to keep you on the edge and wants you to feel like, oh, I have to do overtime and I have to, these sort of self-sacrificing things. And I was
and
like,
they benefit from the subsidization.
they do. The government helps them out. So they get to take, I think it was like $430 billion, right, that they have as assets, the Walton family. And I am a real fan of solutions. So one of the things I had seen earlier in my career was this work done by Zainab Tun, who has a initiative called the Good Jobs Project. And what she has shown with data, and I want to say she works out of MIT, what she's shown with data is actually, if you actually improve the operations of a firm, you can actually fix the low wages problem. Completely fixable within 2 years. And she's got enough data and experiments and stuff behind it now. And so I'm like, okay, so let's say the Walmart heirs subsidize something for 2 years. It would cost them less than 10% of their overall worth, and you could fix the model.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, the question isn't, is it fixable? The question is, why aren't we fixing it?
Hmm.
And self-sacrifice is never going to be the answer, right? Because each person just gets to throw themselves on the funeral pyre and
Right.
no one gets to live a good life. And I'm like, oh, but that's the opportunity here.
Well, I mean, I think you're sort of answering your own question by the description you gave, right? It's the same model, in fact, of our GDP, in that the work women do at home to provide care isn't counted as productive, right? If you pay
I didn't
someone,
use work, right? It's yeah, care
yeah,
is not factored into the economy. And if we had voted a different party in, I actually believe she would have been Secretary of Labor or something. Like she would have been an advisor into that universe and helping us actually have a care economy.
yeah,
And
but I mean, this has been like 30 years of
yes,
feminist economics saying the same thing. And, power doesn't like giving itself up.
no.
So this is the intractable problem, right?
Well, and so one of the things I think I should just sort of back up and say two things that I think are so fundamental to the book. And I'm sorry I didn't say it earlier, but one of the things I did when I named the book Our Best Work is I was just exploring how in those three words you've got sort of forks in the road.
Mm-hmm.
Is our, like the definition of our, is it small or broad? Does it include like the earth? Like
Yes.
how do you define our? Is work about the goal of making money or is it about solving meaningful problems?
Mm-hmm.
Is the role of work about a contract of people being in a box that is defined by someone else as a job? Or is it about the calling and the way in which we utilize our gifts so that it's the interface where the self meets the world? And those aren't just like, therefore, linguistic choices. They're actually the fundamental architecture of our economic model and our social order and our work teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I called it Our Best Work, because I'm basically proposing a construct of expansion of that work, of course, has to be about solving real meaningful problems, and that we have an opportunity, especially with AI coming, to actually do more work that is about work and not jobs. So we have a chance to actually
Right.
make that transition. And then the rest of the book is really about, okay, how do we do that? So that's the first idea I want to share. The second idea, and we've touched on it, I just want to kind of click into it a
Mm-hmm.
little, is we're calling it relational, but there's actually some kind of geeky moment I want to have with you, which is if we make a problem individual, we're solving things at a micro level. So
Yes.
it's saying the woman who's working at Walmart is responsible alone for her family's thrivability.
Mm-hmm.
And so if she is not able to feed her family, she feels like a failure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the individual, and we often in the society kind of, associate success and failure down to the individual. Then there's the macro level, which is the system sucks. It's got a bunch of rules, super complex. Nobody can really change it, right? Because that. And the meso level is the middle. And it connects the micro and the macro.
Yes.
And one of the things that the meso level then is relational. And the minute we change our interactions, we change the individual and we change the system.
Right.
And so in my ideal, sort of heart of hearts, people will read this as a team or as even two people starting together and go, I'm in. Are you in? And then
Yes.
how do we show up at meetings and figure out how to become this?
Mm-hmm.
How do we spread it? How do we light that fire so that we can actually just slowly by slowly creating change?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's even as small as saying, this doesn't work for me, right? And not believing that it's my fault because it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yes.
that's the basic construct is if we can change the relational layer, we can change everything. And I think it gives us a little more power. And it goes back to community.
Yes. And also I think respect
Yeah.
and shared dignity. And I mean, people use the words collaboration a lot, but you can't have collaboration without those things. So I'm going to do maybe a hard turn here, but I don't think it is. You wrote something very interesting on LinkedIn about Epstein and what's going on in the Epstein case. Can you talk about that?
Sure.
Because I think it touches on many of these issues, particularly in terms of our ideas about status or wealth or leadership or good governance.
Mm. Of the many topics I would never want to discuss, it's the Epstein thing. And I'm not saying that to make us.
Do you want me to withdraw it?
No. And the reason is I'm a survivor of sexual violence on multiple fronts. And so whenever the topic comes up, I really have to think about how to protect my own heart in the process. But one of the statistics that I'm really struck with is that 50% of women have been affected by some form of sexual violence. And
Absolutely. I was just going to say, I think we all feel that way.
And so when we look at the Epstein situation, what I'm really surprised by is the media coverage of saying, well, it's a bunch of powerful elite people, sort of like it's them, those losers, those child rapists, it's definitely a them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I think there's something we're actually doing inside organizations that enables them. And this conversation came up recently where I was talking to a company comms leader, and he was basically like, well, we've written the memo and now we're done because we've dealt with the person, kind of thing.
Right.
And I was like, have you addressed the organization?
Mm.
And he goes, no, we're not going to address the organization. And I go, okay, at least every woman, at least, is sitting going, that explains everything. If they found out that someone in their very top leadership was involved, and they'll just say to themselves, oh, that explains the lack of invitations, or that explains the joke that wasn't that funny, or that explains the meetings I was never invited to. Like it just explains so much, and I'm like, so if you're not addressing that group, then what you're saying is it's the apple and not the barrel. And I actually think we have a role here. And the example I gave in that particular piece, and in fact, Fast Company reached out and asked me to expand it. So I just finished that writing earlier today. But the piece I shared online is monologues. And because I'm such a pet peeve of mine. And monologues are like, okay, so let's just describe it, right? And we've all seen it, but it's where someone, like we have an agenda for a meeting. And in fact, the one meeting that I'm telling in the book, people had literally flown in from different countries, and we had spent weeks actually like deciding what agenda we were going to have. And then the guy in charge stood up and did I had a thought this morning in the shower thing, and then just went off. And I was like, oh God, we're going to lose 20 minutes. We have a day together. We have these unbelievably talented people in the room, and we're going to lose at least 20 minutes to this thing, which has nothing to do with the agenda. And most of us just roll our eyes at it because we don't even know how to interfere with that. And then I've watched some people do what Kate Mann calls, what's her term for it?
Empathy?
Yes, empathy, where you actually play into it and you're like, oh, that's so exciting that you had that shower thought. And so younger men will often have empathy for that man and actually encourage him to keep going. But monologues are actually taking all the oxygen out of the room. Because what they're saying is one person's ideas are more important than the totality of who's in the room. And of course, innovation is shaped by three things. One is access to new and novel ideas. Two is whether or not those ideas have effective friction so they can be shaped into real and robust solutions. Third is whether or not we're actually solving real problems. And monologues basically destroy all three, right? Because it's saying, I'm the only voice, and I'm going to take up so much room that we don't even have time to have like the necessary friction of other people's ideas beating up against each other in a good way, right? And by the way, I'm going to focus on something that interests me and doesn't actually solve any real problems.
Yeah.
So you're destroying value creation in the room. And then you mostly, I know certainly I've seen us do this with, personal relationships too, where someone does it and you're like, oh, that's just Uncle George at the Thanksgiving table. And you're like, it's not just Uncle George.
This is, again, I think one of those micro to macro things. You maybe are being more diplomatic than I will be, but men monologue. Women are very unlikely to monologue. And so when you've written about this here, I've written about it literally in every book I've written. I've mentioned the topic of speech dominance and why it matters, right? In your book, you talk about it in terms of whose voice matters.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good way to put it, because people generally are not conscious of when this is happening. They're not thinking about it. And so I remember was it maybe just before COVID or when COVID happened, there was all this Zoom analysis of new conference calls. Everyone was on conference calls. And it turned out that men in conference calls were talking 98% of the time. And women were simply not participating. Now, that may have been true for many reasons, but one of the reasons that it's true is that the men were talking and that people didn't have protocols for interrupting in that particular format. They also don't have them in conference rooms,
Exactly.
right? And
Exactly.
so I think that trying to raise consciousness of the issue is important. Like even the fact that if a woman in a room speaks 30% of the time, she's considered dominating the conversation is an important fact to know, because no woman can take care of that herself. It really requires a collective intent and a collective understanding so that you can develop consensus rules and you can change the dynamics of conversation so that you don't have the monologuers, so that you hear everybody's voice.
And Eleanor Ostrom's work was really interesting because she basically said, if you can have a series of cascading consequences, you can actually get the behavior to be what you want it to be. And so in my thinking, that's like, do you realize you're monologuing right now? And then another person can wait 5 minutes and say, I think we just had this conversation.
Right. Or I think someone else just said the same thing.
Right. And just like figure out a way to do an interruption that is
Mm-hmm.
not saying, so my general approach is, I don't want to say you're an asshole. You might be an asshole. I don't know that. I don't
Yes,
know you well
yes.
enough to
But
know that.
I don't,
Right. But
nothing should be gained.
I don't want to start there. I want to start
Mm-hmm.
with, I want to give you the opportunity to show up to this work well. And I'm going to nudge you in that direction. And if I can nudge you in that direction and you can actually understand that we are part of a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not about if your voice is heard. It is about whether or not we solve the thing we came here to solve.
Right.
Right. And so again, our agenda isn't here, it's here. And the reason, therefore, we have to do this is because this is how we actually go and solve the problems we actually want to solve. And, whether it's cancer or the climate change issues or gender inequity or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, right? Like these are all different things that we can be working on.
Right.
And instead of our attention being in this.
Well, and I think the way you put it in the book, which is very succinct, which is if we can all collectively agree to serve progress and not power, then you can affect that as a reorientation.
Right.
And you have here, and that's married to this idea of shared voice. You have the goal is to apply share of voice strategies in this particular instance where you have a practical takeaway at the end, share of voice strategies at your next meeting. And I think for some people, particularly in the current environment, that might be onerous or silly sounding. It might be dismissed as wokeism, but it's really so important to everything else that you're talking about. Because if you can't be heard, if you can't collaborate, if you can't distribute the intelligence, which starts with this, then it won't work. Can you talk about that a little further? Because you have some strategies.
I do. And in fact, I kind of co-opted back that phrase share of voice because it's actually been used for quite a while to talk about a competitive model in the marketplace of brand, who
Mm-hmm.
has the larger
Right.
share. And I was like, isn't it terrible that they use this beautiful language of sharing and then made it a competitive construct to be
Right.
like, yeah, I need to dominate the airwaves kind of thing. And so I'm like, we get to take that word back and actually use it for what it's meant for, which is, having that moment of, I'm going to listen to you, maybe reflect back what I heard, give you some spaciousness to think about that, to actually think together. Because that's what monologuing is also really not
Yeah,
allowing
it
to do.
totally blocks that.
Right. And because then that guy's idea, and it is mostly guys, I admit that. I am really being careful in the book not to make it about gender, not because I don't see the data and stuff.
Yeah, no. I appreciate that.
But to say, I don't care who does it. Right.
Yes.
And I just want us to agree on how do we fix it. So we don't need to be in the shame or blame model.
Right.
And one of my colleagues, Tim, is someone who will actually wait so long sometimes that I'm like, is he gonna respond?
Say something, say it.
Yeah, I know. And it's so funny because now I've had to be like, can you be more direct and just say the thing? Because I'd like us to go a little faster than this tempo. But what's lovely is he's actually taught himself how to give enough space so that the rest of the room can have it. Because he knows, he's thinking, he's got ideas, he can wait, he can be patient and figure out when does this make sense. And I think that's the maturity that all of us can have, right? Which is to go, what is additive here? towards the common goal.
Right.
And then, and to also like give ourselves permission, like that whole thing of like, a lot of books are written about speak up, which make me
Mhm.
insane. And even a friend of mine published a book that was called Speak Up, and I said, this actually isn't the problem, right? That it's almost like the corollary, which is shut the fuck up, so that the person who's speaking can actually be heard. And she was like, yeah, but this is the paradigm we know. And I go, well, we're reinforcing the wrong paradigm then.
Mm.
Right? Because the minute we frame it as speak up, we've actually just signaled that the onus is on the individual to change
Right.
instead of what are group norms.
Mhm.
In the book, I published my 10 favorites. I've published that list for like 10 plus years. So for every meeting I've ever run, I have a list going of like, here's how I run meetings.
Mhm.
I'll share it in advance and be like, this is how we're going to run. And man, I run great meetings. And so over the years, every time I give a talk and I mention this list, people are like, oh, can you send me the
Yes.
list? I'm like, absolutely. Let's open source this thing. And I'm not saying I'm the only one who has a good set of ideas, but creatively we can figure out what is our list,
Right.
right? What is our list that we want? And then how do we use that?
And also, you make a very good point, and I think it's a habit. It's almost like a corporate rut of asking new questions. I think it's very hard when people are tired, when they're worried, when they're stressed, when they feel individually responsible in the ways we've talked about, to step back and try and capture your imagination to get to the point where you're asking those questions. Can you talk a little bit about this? You call it a limiting norm, which is find the answer. Find the answer doesn't automatically imply ask different questions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of my favorite chapters too. I'm going to probably
Mhm.
say that about every chapter though, because I'm in love with my little children right now. So one of the things I notice a lot, like, I live in Silicon Valley. I meet up with people at like Cafe Coupa in Palo
Mhm.
Alto, and every table is doing a VC pitch kind of conversation. It's very funny. And before someone even finishes like here's the problem I'm trying to solve,
Mhm.
you can just overhear the other person saying, I know the answer, and just jumping it. And
Yes.
and I'm always so amused because I'm like, dude, the person basically didn't even finish their own thoughts. So I
No.
don't know how you would possibly know the answer. But what you're saying actually, by saying I know the answer, what you're saying is do what I did.
Think what I thought.
Think what I thought. And so, in fact, it was a Vistage group, which is like a peer CEO group that I belonged to for years, that taught me a really interesting and better way, which was you had to submit a topic for discussion. You had to send it in advance so people could brief, which I think is such a much better way of using meetings. And then you asked for, is it a small problem for you, a medium, or a large? And based on that, you get 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever.
Mhm.
And then let's say it was a 30-minute block that you got. 20 minutes of that had to be about questions. And of course, all of us, and I read about this in the book, we're such jerks because we all wanted to be like, isn't the answer such and such? Because we wanted so much to jump to that sort of like, let me give you the answer. And we'd always kind of get like tapped on the nose and like go back to actually being curious. And what we would ask is, okay, how did this problem start? And
Mhm.
how does it affect the team? And do you see this problem in other parts of your life? And just like all sorts of different, we'll just pull on threads. And some of it is based on our own experience. So we're like, oh, is it like my situation? Right. So we'll like pull on a thread that way. And after 20 minutes, what was so fascinating was that almost always the person had understood the issue so much clearer, because usually the presenting problem is not the actual problem. And they had their own clarity, their own like impetus of where to go. And so we basically grew someone's capabilities in that process,
Mhm.
how to think about the problem
Mm.
so that they could have their own answer, which is so different than if, I show up to you and say, hey, just do this thing,
Totally.
right? And then you're like, do I really want to do that thing?
Mm.
And there's could be other internal constraints that you haven't worked through because you haven't heard the fullness of your own understanding.
That's so interesting. I went to British schools in a colony. When I was a child, it was still a colony where I'm from. And the schools were all very focused on memorization, on
Mm,
rote memorization. And you didn't talk to teachers, you just did what they told you, right? And
yeah.
then when I was 16, I came to the US and I went to a school that was the opposite of that. And I was in my first class. It was an English literature class. And the teacher said, "What did you think of the book?" And I didn't know what to do because no one had ever asked me what I'd thought about anything
Oh, wow.
that I had learned or memorized.
Right.
And it really strikes me that your framing there does this. It's that epiphany moment where you're like, oh, I have something valuable maybe to say or contribute, which unfortunately in a lot of places is not the norm.
Well, one of my arguments so this is now my fourth book, and
Mhm.
so they're actually all part of a larger theme.
Yes.
So one of the insights I had maybe 10, 15 years ago was that the economic unit of value is no longer about capital, but about ideas.
Mhm.
And ideas come from that singular place in the world someone stands, where only they stand, a function of their history and experience, visions and hopes. And from that singular point of view, they have something to add, and then connected with other people can actually do something really big.
Mhm.
And so that is the piece that we are not yet tapping into. That's a latency in the system.
Mm.
And it's like us, like if we had 3 production lines and you were the leader of like a company that had 3 production lines, we're basically having 1 production line running all the time.
Right.
And then we kind of look at the other 2 lines and we're like, is that really important? Is it really important for us to listen to those people?
I have to ask you this. We don't have a lot of time and we have to wrap up soon, but that just makes my brain leap to AI.
Yeah.
Right? Do you have anything to say? You can't answer this question, I doubt, but it's just too big a question, I know. But what you just described, so much of what we're talking about is going to hit the wall of AI, whether AI works or not, the way we think in terms of intelligence. But what do you see in this moment?
Well, first of all, I defined intelligence in the book as what we create together. It's that shared understanding we create together, which is different than information,
Hmm.
which is different than insight. And
Right.
I think the people who are running around saying AI is going to take our jobs are the people who are quite happy with a model where what is considered smart is data driven, analytically wrote,
Hmm.
prove it to me model.
Right.
By the way, keeps you stuck in the past,
Hmm.
right?
Oh,
Data
it's so recursive. That's right.
is recursive, right? So data is almost always
And
about.
conservative. It's recursive, conservative, replicating the biases, all of it.
I wrote a note to somebody late last week, and basically asking if I could participate in something, and they wrote back saying, "Is there data behind it?" And I just was like, "Oh my God, can I write this down and send you an article?" And
Mm.
because it was what he was basically saying is, I only believe this kind of intelligence,
Yes.
air quotes me, this is what's smart.
Mm.
And if you can't prove it to me, which by the way, I have an MBA, I've shipped $18 billion of products, 100 different products across so many different tech companies. I've been on corporate boards. So I'm ranked one of the top management thinkers in the world now, 10 plus years. I was named a future thinker, which is the top prize you can get for that. I'm in the top 10 HR thinkers.
Mm.
I've written 4 books. Like, of the
You're a
many things, I'm pretty sure,
very kind person.
right?
How did you respond?
I'm like I'm like, "Do I really need to prove to you that there's, like, a data model?" I'm like, "Oh my god." And the most ironic part about it is the thing I had attached had data in it. He was using it as a foil to say, "Jump. Jump higher."
Well, I mean, that's interesting, right? Because that is, in fact, I think what's happening on university campuses everywhere, which is, again, I'll just go back to this because I'm fixated at the moment, always in general. But the punt to objective data
Yes.
is a male flight turn, right? You see it in STEM, you see it in PECs, you see it in finance. And I think in times of uncertainty, I'm not saying it to indict men for being interested in those things, but in times of uncertainty, which are very high, especially for men, because masculinity is in flux and so confusing, I think,
Mhm.
the turn is to, I want the data, I want the facts, I want the objectivity, I want the science. And I think we're seeing that everywhere. Like we're seeing that come up over and over and over again. And you
And
and I are both people who like data. We like science. We like facts. That has nothing to do with it, you know?
My first job was as an accountant. My next one was research. I understand numbers. I
Yes.
understand how to run a revenue of a major company. Like, I got that. So that is
Mm,
not the question. The
that's
question is,
right.
do I also value intuitive knowledge? Do I also value kinesthetic knowledge? Do I also value
Yes,
imagination? Right.
that's right.
And so I'm really trying to bring in, what are the ways in which we invent the future?
Hmm.
It is not by looking at the past data.
Yes, that's
That is
right.
part of it, but it cannot be the entirety. And
That's right.
that's what we're doing when we're limiting intelligence to that sort of data model. And I think that's where all the people who are running around saying AI is going to replace our jobs, they're lacking the imagination to believe
Yes.
what else is possible. I'm not
Yes.
saying there isn't risk. I'm not trying to diminish all that, but I'm
Hmm.
actually enough of a inventor to understand this actually represents an opportunity.
So I'm going to wrap us up by asking you one last question.
Okay.
I think it's fascinating. You and I actually concluded in exactly the same way, in that I also describe in this moment of backlash that we've hit the hard limits of supremacist imaginations.
Mm,
We've hit them. And we're in crises, polycrises globally all over because of it. And what we need is this imagination, this, liberating, freeing imagination. And we both also concluded in that vein with refusal.
mm,
And so I want to read what you have here. Um, you said you don't have to fix what failed you. You can build what frees you, which I love.
mm,
And you go on to say it's the quiet, persistent refusal to submit to what harms us that makes change possible, which is, I think, just a delightful ending. Can you hug that particular baby? I'm going to hold this up for everyone to see, and and conclude, I think, with your thoughts on those ideas.
Yeah, I think sometimes we think about hope as being this very soft thing. Um, and I actually think it's the most sturdy thing to say, if it doesn't work for me, it doesn't work. And it's taken me way too long to get to that sentence. But now that I've got it, I can do that internal assessment to go, if it
Hmm.
doesn't work for me, it doesn't work. That's not to say I don't have to every now and then cave into situations and so on, right? I don't have
Hmm.
to, right? But I don't have to believe that it is good.
Right. Or
And
it's all that there is.
that's right. And so for right now, we might do X
Hmm.
until we can get to Y. But
Hmm.
I'm not going to believe that I am the problem. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, that is the only thing possible.
Mm,
And that, I think, gives us a sturdiness and a lever from which we can actually start to imagine what comes next.
right. And I think ultimately it's this idea that refusal is not a negative. It doesn't have a negative valence. It's actually an incredibly generative, positive behavior, act, belief. When you come to the conclusion and you're like, no, actually, I don't have to do that anymore that way. Um, so is there anything you want to close with? I just want to thank you for this book and this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Soraya. I'm so glad for this, because it's like such a complicated and beautiful conversation you and I are having.
Hmm.
And it's so nuanced. And that's actually, I think, the opportunity here too, is not to look for easy answers, but to be
Hmm.
willing to sit in the beauty and marvel of the complexity right now and actually go, okay, what is that imagination? So I hope I get to partner with you to do more
Yes,
world.
yes, I hope so too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us, those of you who are here with us, and also thank you to Porchlight for hosting us today.